listen to it. Yeah. Boom! We are live for episode 59. I think, did I change the YouTube? Yep, 59. For
59.
to talk some Star Trek. Bill, what are we talking about today, and how did we get to this topic?
We are going to talk about the best of both worlds because you are rewatching the Next Generation and just came across the best of both worlds.
Yes.
So we were kind of toying around with some topic ideas for this week, and we were back and forth on some things. And I was like, hold on, like you're getting ready to watch the best of both worlds. If there's an episode that's worth kind of dedicating like a whole hour to and having a conversation just about, it's probably the best of both worlds. And we've done it for some other stuff too. So if we've done it for other episodes, we got to do it for this. So definitely looking forward to kind of really dedicating some time to talking about it. Kind of the questions that I really am interested in tackling are, how well does it hold up? Is it deserving of its status? Like it's kind of pretty commonly put in like the Mount Rushmore of Star Trek episodes. Milestone, huge achievement in kind of establishing what TNG was going to be like and all that stuff. So curious to see what you think as somebody who just kind of got to it naturally in the chronology of the series. I've seen it many, many, many times. Rob's in the chat and just rewatched it today. So curious to hear everybody's perspective. So anybody who's in the chat, definitely share your thoughts on this episode. What do you think of it? Where does it stand for you? Is it overrated? Is it correctly rated? I don't think it could possibly be underrated. But yeah, looking forward to hearing about it. I know we kind of usually start off with rewatch discussions. We're kind of naturally talking, the whole episode's based on where you are in your rewatch. So that's easy. I'll tell you, I watched the first handful of episodes of TOS yesterday, first 5. Where Nine Minutes Gone Before, The Man Trap, Charlie X, The Naked Time, and The Enemy Within. And that's cool. Feels good to be back in TOS, and I really think that show starts off pretty strong. I was getting some mixed responses to that on Twitter. Some people that I trust and like people whose opinions I value were chiming in. Ian, for example, who is always really interesting with his takes, finds those episodes really rough. Because he thinks they kind of start slow and characters aren't like fully formed yet. And I kind of have an opposite view. I think it starts really strong. Excited to be getting into TOS. I'm sure I'll be talking about it as we get going with future episodes, and I'm into the swing of that show. So yeah. So I guess I just want to ask you right up front. You just watched it. What do you think? Like, how does it stand for you? How did it hold up? Generally speaking,
it's really good, and I'll kind of talk about my progression. So, I think this episode more than any other episode is kind of quoted as at least top 10, top 5 in anyone's ranking. So I knew it was going to be good going in, but I just tried to kind of set that aside and try to kind of look at it with fresh eyes, really objectively. And I've seen it before, but yeah, it blew me away. I loved it. So many different things that were explored and avenues, and it was just really good.
Yeah, I think what always stands out to me about it is there's a lot more going on in it than I think the log line, like the thing everybody points to, is like, oh, Picard gets assimilated. Like it's the episode with Locutus. And there's a lot more going on than just that. I mean, that's a huge thing for sure. And the Borg, there's a lot of big, cool action adventure stuff. But I think the Riker stuff, like his character story about, how to choose which way to go with your career and which way you want to go in life.
In Picard's
kind of going with
shadow.
comfort. Yep.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of meat to chew on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's all thematically like in line. Like, Riker is struggling with the idea of kind of leaving the Enterprise and leaving Troy. I would say it's not like spelled out, but I think that's pretty obvious. Like these are the kinds of things he's struggling with, with this decision, leaving Picard, leaving Troy, leaving his family on the ship, to go kind of start anew when he's finally kind of gotten comfortable in a role as first officer on the Enterprise.
Yep.
And then, he's wavering on it, pretty clearly leaning towards not going. And then he's given no choice. Picard gets taken away from him.
Yep.
And he's forced into the role of being the captain, and has to rise to the occasion, but kind of through that experience, realizes even more that, he's happy with what he's doing and is content to kind of be where he is in life. So that kind of stuff really, as a youngish, I guess, person in the professional world, it speaks to me a lot more now than it did before. Like having these kind of crossroads in your career and deciding what you want to do, or challenges and questions that I've had to ask myself in my own life, here and there along the way. And I know you have kind of too in recent months.
Yeah,
with like
kind of hit home.
crossroads in your career.
Yeah.
So it's really, it's one of those episodes that I think really gets better as you age and as life, as you keep going back to it, as you get older. When I was younger and I was a kid, I definitely thought of it as, the action extravaganza episode with the Borg and Picard getting assimilated and all the space battle stuff, and all that stuff is great. It's really, really good, and it's like on another level compared to what you usually get in TNG. But as I've gotten older, I've appreciated it for other reasons as well. So
Rob's asking, do you think Riker is waiting for Picard to retire so he can have the Enterprise? I think that, and this is just my personal opinion, that the Enterprise is kind of like the top of the mountain. That's the flagship, and he wants to be in command of that. And I think he won't be happy with anything else. So I feel like that's why maybe he's kind of hesitant to kind of just leave the Enterprise. So
yeah, I think for sure. I think there's definitely an allure to the flagship of the fleet, the most prestigious place to be.
Yep.
It's I think even earlier on in a season 2 episode, the Icarus Factor, when he's kind of presented with the same thing, he's presented with an opportunity to go take command, and he's waffling on that too, and decides not to do it. And I think in that episode, he really kind of spells it out as, the question is really, do you want to be the first officer on the biggest ship in the fleet, and keep learning in this like pristine environment, or do you want to go be the captain of a ship that's like on the outlines of Federation space, kind of doing a very small job? Do you want to be the captain of this little tiny thing out there, or do you want to be in ground zero as the first officer? And I think he does maybe envision himself in the perfect world, kind of being groomed by Picard, learning from Picard. He's a very different person than Picard. He's Picard's strengths are not necessarily Riker's strengths. So I think he knows that. I think he's smart enough to see that, and is trying to, get as much out of Picard as he can. And then, I think the natural thing that, seems like might happen, Picard's not a young guy. I think the idea of taking over is probably on his mind as well. Hey, Rob's asking us, what do we do? Do you want your own ship, or do you want to be the XO on the flagship? Like,
XO on the flagship.
I like the idea of being the XO on the flagship. I think nothing but good things are probably going to come from a job like that. You're definitely in the spotlight, and I think it's probably easy to kind of get lost in the shuffle as just another captain who's out there, on a very maybe one-dimensional mission in a corner of, Federation space doing whatever. But Ross is saying he'd want to step out on his own at some point.
Right.
I think that's there too, and I think he does. By Nemesis, he takes the Titan. He does get to a point where, I think he's ready to go do his own thing. Maybe it's one of those things. He's tired of waiting for Picard to retire. He's not. Picard's not moving. Time to go. I think his life changed over the course of that time. He got to marry Troy, and that relationship kind of became more defined. That maybe made it easier for him to, take some of that stuff he loves about being on the Enterprise with him, and it's not quite as, I don't know. I just find Riker's arc as a whole really, really relatable and really well defined, kind of in an underrated way. You know, I don't hear Riker's name get thrown out a lot when people talk about like which characters have the best character arc. You hear Kira a lot. You hear a lot of the Deep Space Nine characters. You know, Chief O'Brien and Cisco having like really well defined character arcs. But I think Riker's really up there, and I think The Best of Both Worlds is a big kind of milestone in that arc and a really good like you know, hinge point for kind of determining what that arc's going to be for the next 5 years and a handful of movies. It's not, you know, as clearly defined as some of those Deep Space Nine characters, but there is a definite growth there that I think is maybe a little undervalued.
Yeah, even from seasons 1 to now, I think that
he's grown a lot.
When Riker was on the bridge, he was, you know, he's quoting regulations to Picard.
Yeah.
And now look at him now. He's kind of in reverse roles where he's the captain and he has like some young hotshot XO that's trying to quote regulation to him.
Absolutely.
So, that's what another thing that I love about Best of Both Worlds is that kind of whole that whole dynamic.
You like the Riker Shelby
adversarial
stuff. I agree. I think that's a huge strength for the episode. And I saw somebody, I can't remember who it was, somebody I hope it's not somebody who's in this chat that I'm forgetting. But somebody pointed out that one of their struggles with Best of Both Worlds is Shelby. They think I think somebody said she's a Mary Sue, kind of just like a convenient hitch. But I think she's great. I think she's a believable hotshot, you know, ambitious Starfleet officer. I don't think she's very different than Riker was in the beginning of TNG, like you said. And it brings a sense of drama and some tension that's not always there in TNG. Characters who are butting heads and don't always agree. I mean, is that something that definitely stood out to you?
Yeah, it's definitely. I think that I don't see it when people write her off. I think it just kind of adds to the plot and kind of coming from kind of the earlier seasons. It's to me, I don't know, adds more drama. Whereas in kind of the first seasons, there wasn't that kind of B plot drama that kind of also incorporated into the A plot. So
exactly,
I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's a big strength of the episode. I think she's really good. I think the actress is good. I think she brings a different dimension to the episode that makes it unique. And Ross, to answer your question, I'm reading the Wikipedia definition of a Mary Sue, and it says a Mary Sue is an idealized and seemingly perfect fictional character. Often this character is recognized as an author, insert, or wish fulfillment. So it's like a construct character that's there to kind of move the story along exactly as the author wants, and sometimes more problematic than that. I don't necessarily agree with that, but yeah.
I also think it's cool that they just in the episode not a lot of they don't explore this in Star Trek because this is their career, this is you know how it's just cool that they explore you know moving up the ranks and going this way, this path, and this career, this path, and so I like that also.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it does a really good job of showing that, and that's something that you don't always see in Trek. You know, in Star Trek, a lot of the characters that we see are pretty content to be in their jobs and not necessarily. You don't get that
ambition almost.
Ambition. Yeah, exactly. Like pronounced. Like I'm on the rise. I'm you know. I'm on the fast track, and I think it's a big strength. Like I said, I think it brings a unique tension dynamic that TNG doesn't always have. I think stretches of episodes go by where you don't. And I love TNG. TNG is maybe my favorite show. If I'm talking about my heart, like what does my heart say is my favorite show? Like the first thing that comes to mind is TNG, but it's a show that is, you know, kind of built to push back against some of that tension. And when you get it, it really does kind of stand out.
Yeah.
Rob's pointing out that Trek FM did an interview with Elizabeth Dennehy, who played Shelby. And I think I've heard that. I think I listened to that maybe a couple years old, Rob, I'm thinking. But I think I've listened to that, and it was indeed very good if I remember correctly. What do you think of the obvious like action adventure elements of it? Like, do you think the stuff with the Borg works really well? Like
I think it worked really well. It definitely had a lot of action into it, but it didn't rush. It didn't.
It's not rushed. Yeah.
It didn't feel rushed because majority of the first episode, we don't see the Borg. It's them tracking it down. So it's almost it feels big to me in that's kind of like an action adventure story where it's not like you're confined to an hour or an hour and a half or whatever to kind of jump into the story, to jump into the action. So it kind of gracefully kind of moved its way in.
Agreed. Yeah, no, I think it's not an episode that's so action packed that it like drowns out character stuff. Like some of the best stuff in the episode is the action adventure stuff, for lack of a better word. Like a lot of that really is memorable and really well done.
Yeah.
You know, the you know, getting chased into the nebula in part 1 and the obvious like ship separating and you know that all that stuff is awesome. But a lot of the really good stuff in the episode is equally like when I think of Best of Both Worlds, like I was saying, I really love the Riker stuff, but I also really like the like stuff like the conversation between Guinan and Riker in Picard's ready room, like talking about you got to let him go, you got to be your own captain. Like it's an action episode, but it's not so in love with its own coolness that it can't take a breather and have those character moments that really drive home what the episode's really trying to say. So I think deserves a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, I love that scene.
Pacing is that.
Yeah,
that's a big time.
He just, you know, Riker just feels uncomfortable and uneasy, and like shots of just like the empty chair, and it's great.
It is. Yep, that's really good. And I think the scene between Picard and Guinan in part 1, as Picard's like kind of preparing for battle, like he's saying like old Roman generals or whatever would like stroll the battlefield before. Like there's just such like goosebump like classic Star Trek stuff happening there. And you know, whenever Picard's alone with Guinan and kind of just talking about the big picture of like what the situation is, it's always good. That's definitely another kind of favorite scene. Guinan is a low-key great character. I don't know about you, but I feel like when she's involved and she's got good stuff to do, and she pops into an episode like this, where she's not in it a lot. She's got like a couple of scenes in each part, but her scenes are often like some of the highlights of the episode. And this is no exception to that. Rob's asking, is Shelby arrogant or confident? Uses her initiative or disobedient?
Borderline of both.
Borderline of both. Agreed. Yeah. I think, you know, she reminds me of characters like Kirk. You know, Kirk was a captain and kind of had a little more leeway with that kind of thing, but he would always kind of walk the line between, you know, initiative, disobedient, you know, maybe violating orders here and there. But because he's our hero, he's who we're used to being around. It's like, yeah, he's doing it. But coming from Shelby, who's not at the top of the food chain, you know, not captain and not a regular character, somebody who's kind of coming into our dynamic and pushing against our characters, I think definitely makes it a little uncomfortable. But I think that's good for the show. I think that's cool. I think she's somebody who's coming in and trying to shake things up. And I don't think she's wrong. Like, you know, I think what you're probably getting at there, Rob, the scene that kind of comes to mind when you're thinking about that is she kind of jumps ahead and beams down with Data to the planet that they're kind of investigating, and you know, doesn't wait for Riker and Geordi and whoever else is going to go down, and kind of jumps ahead of Picard. And then she also takes her plan to Picard ahead of Riker. You know, to me, a lot of her mistakes are procedural, and some of it is maybe it's partially Riker who's wrong too. I don't know. Like, I think her ideas are good. I think she's a little overeager maybe, but you know, some of those things, like the taking the idea to Picard thing, you know, I think maybe there's a little bit of Riker in there too, like kind of not wanting to let her kind of get too much in good graces, I guess. I don't know. It's complicated, which I like. It's not an easy, she's bad, he's good. There's junk on both sides that can be pointed at as a mistake. That's how I feel. I think Guinan will be one of the few characters to appear in the Picard spinoff. Ross says that could be.
That would be cool.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
I think we talked. Yeah, go ahead.
Because in the episode, she's like, "Yeah, our relationship is more than friends, more than family," and I think that kind of relationship has to last 20 years. So.
Absolutely, and I was last week when we were talking about all the news. All right, maybe that was 2 weeks ago. Was it 2 weeks? No, it was last week. All the Picard news.
No, 2 weeks. No,
I don't know.
it
was last weekend, I think. But one of the things I said was I think of all the characters in TNG, the one that might make the most sense to be still around in 20 years was Crusher, and I think that's true. But I think Guinan made equally sense because of that, unexplained kind of unbelievably close relationship that they have. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you see Guinan at some point in that new show. Ross also says he thinks the Riker-Shelby dynamic would have worked if Stewart had not returned for season 4, which I wasn't around. I was 4, 3, somewhere there when this was airing. But I understand from what people were saying that there were all these rumors about when during the summer between these 2 episodes over the hiatus, a lot of rumors about, Patrick Stewart might leave. This might be it for him. It might be Riker's the captain. Shelby's going to be the first officer. Like there were a lot of speculation about that. So a lot of time was spent thinking about like, what's the show going to look like if Picard's gone and this is kind of the new thing. And I think that probably would have worked. I think the chemistry that the actors had, Frakes and Elizabeth Dennehy, and the uneasiness in their relationship, the characters, I think would have been an interesting thing to see play out for a longer period of time. And I think it would have worked. Would have worked.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think one of the things that really stands out to me about this episode is the score. I know you're not, music does not, but this is a really big.
It, though. Some moments were like, dang.
Yeah, like
score,
really aggressive.
Yeah.
The obviously everybody always talks about like the end of part 1, that like thumping cliffhanger music, but when they first find the Borg cube and it's like coming towards them and the music really ramps up and Picard says, send a message to Starfleet Command, we've engaged the Borg, and like all the music's playing, like that's great stuff. That's like cinematic, like movie quality Star Trek stuff. That I think if somebody pressed me to say like what's your favorite like Star Trek episode score, like what's the best music in Star Trek episode, I think Best of Both Worlds is pretty standard answer that I would probably agree with. Yeah, music is awesome, Rob. Tension, suspense, all that stuff is all over it. What do you think about how they kind of wrapped it up? Like I'm not trying to jump into the end completely here, but I am kind of one of the things that people do knock the Best of Both Worlds for. If you're talking about it as like collective 2 parts, like one episode, if you want to try to lump it together as one story. I think the most common criticism for it is that people think that the ending, the way that they defeat the Borg, is maybe a little easy or a little bit anticlimactic. Did you find that watching that? Do you think the ending's a little weak? Do you think there should have been more there?
I don't think so. I think that I don't know. I thought it worked fine. I think it's a logical course of action they took to try to go through, use Picard. I liked it because the Borg take Picard and they're going to use Picard against them, and now they kind of kick back the Borg with using Picard against them. So I thought that was cool. But
I agree.
Yeah.
I've never really had a problem with it. Whenever I've like put out my rankings of episodes, I think both times I've done it, I've gotten some pushback for having the Best of Both Worlds Part 2 like right there with Part 1, like way at the top of my list.
Yeah.
And people have been like, "Do you really think Part 2 is that good? Like, don't you think it's like way further down?" And no, I think it is that good. I think it's got maybe not quite as many great character moments as Part 1 does, but it's got that scene between Riker and Guinan. It's got a lot of great stuff between Riker and Shelby. And the action stuff is just freaking awesome, and I agree with you with what you just said, with the way they kind of resolve it. I think it's cool. I think yeah, the Borg, we're trying to use a new tactic and it had unforeseen flaws. Yeah, I like the fact that the crew found a way to like turn back what the Borg were trying to do and use it against them. Grappler saying in retrospect with the story arcs of later Trek, drawing it out would have been cool, but they resolved it extremely well for it being a contained two-parter. Like it's one of the problems of episodic TV. I think a lot of 90s Trek kind of suffers from maybe some of the same things. The stories don't go on forever. So there are a lot of episodes where maybe the conclusion's a little rushed. But yes.
Yep.
But this one I think works a lot better than some others. I don't have a lot of the same issues that many do about how they kind of wrap the storyline up.
To me,
I think it works.
To me, you can't have one without the other. I feel like first one has great character moments, but then I think part two has equally great action and adventure. So I think together, I think it's a good blend.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think the whole like way that they kind of went back and used. I was just talking about the scene where Shelby decides to take her plan to Picard against Riker's
over Riker,
wishes, right? Riker says he doesn't even want to go down that road, and Shelby does it anyway, and Picard rejects it. And her idea, if memory serves, is that she wants to separate the ship and do that whole thing, right?
That's what they do.
That's what they do. And they do it because they know Picard knows that. Like Picard knows that plan and knows that it was rejected. And they use that against. Like they take that plan and modify it just enough to confuse Picard, Locutus, which is really cool. Like there's enough of that really cool stuff and kind of innovative writing, I think, that really makes season 2. I mean, makes part 2 work really well. Rob's talking about best of both worlds, kind of connective tissue to First Contact, which is definitely another big thing. If you're thinking big picture about like where this stands and Star Trek canon continuity, it certainly does set up a lot of things that come later.
It's similar in that they use a character against them, but
one of my favorite shots in it, if we're just talking like very little tiny specific things, something that has always got me even since I was a kid, is the shot of Data and Worf in the shuttlecraft taking off out of the Enterprise, and you just see like the battle outside like it's a one shot, like it just stays on them, and you see out the window like leaving the Enterprise and the battle happening around them. That to me like gave me goosebumps when I was 4, and it still does today. Like it really works well. The way that the shuttle like shakes and stuff, it's just really well done. So there's a lot of like really cool production stuff in it. The score, the visual effects, I think it's shot really well. Really, really just across the board, like just genuinely really successful on every level. What did you like seeing the ship separate again? Like it's one of those things that they obviously were kind of setting up at the very beginning of TNG as like this is like the cool thing the ship can do, and it doesn't happen a whole lot, but it happens here.
I'm not a fan of just how the ship looks without the saucer. I'm a bigger fan of just it's connected. I love the battle bridge though, that set and all that. It was awesome. So I love the battle bridge. And there's just small little moments that just like kind of jump out to me, like when Picard's assimilated, he'll still call him number 1. That was just like eerie and creepy, and I'm like, yes, that's such good, I don't know, such good TV. But
I think it's really important that he does that because it drives home that there is some element of Picard left. Like he's not like just a human body that's kind of used completely, like, and just they didn't just take a human body and not use what's in his head. Like they're using the knowledge that he has against the Federation, everything he knows about Earth and Starfleet and what their plans are is all there. Like it's all accessed by the Borg. So it's like definitely a creepy moment and like a whoa kind of thing, but I think it really drives home like you're in trouble. He knows everything. Like, this is Picard, but not really. But it's Picard. And one thing that I kind of wish we would have done, and we'll have to touch on this maybe next week when we kind of keep going, is the next episode after Best of Both Worlds is Family, which is a very quiet character study, but it's all about like the fallout of this for Picard and his kind of battling the demons, stemming from this, because he, like I just said, like when he's Locutus, he's got Picard's memories, and when Picard is Picard again, he's got Locutus's memories. So he's dealing with all that in Family, and I think a lot of people like to kind of lump all three together as like a kind of weird three-parter. So I'll definitely be curious to hear what you have to say when you kind of hit Family again after watching this. I think it's another highlight. It's totally different. Like there's no action whatsoever. It is completely just character drama, but it's definitely very connected to Best of Both Worlds in a lot of ways. Rob saying one scene I never remembered when I was younger. Tear we see rolling down Picard's face as he is assimilated, very poignant and emotional. Yep, that's definitely a really good moment. Yeah. He's conscious of what's happening. I think he kind of knows what's happening. He knows what the fallout of this is probably going to be. There's a lot of really good stuff in that moment. Yes, and Rob's pointing out Best of Both Worlds leads up to the Space Nine as well.
Wolf 359.
Wolf 359. Yep, plays very.
359 is
359. Yeah.
Data says in the episode. It says
yeah, it does.
I was like, what?
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
It's the one time you'll ever hear it like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Best of Both Worlds, a lot of people like to kind of try to point to in the Star Trek universe, like in the 24th century, canon of Star Trek. The Wolf 359 incident is there, for lack of a better word, like 9/11. Like it's this thing that just is earth-shatteringly changing everything that Starfleet's doing, and it affects people all across the board. Like, I think that's evident in that. Yeah, like when Deep Space Nine comes, there's referencing back to that. Even in Voyager, like Wolf 359 is mentioned a lot after Best of Both Worlds. This is a big thing that they kind of made a big effort to have it not be just like another incident that happened. It's kind of a game changer in a lot of ways for how Starfleet's going to do business, and I think it changed a lot for not just that like in-universe stuff, but I think it changed a lot for the way Star Trek was going to go. I think they became more ambitious with action adventure kind of stuff after this. I think maybe this the coolness of this kind of set the bar pretty high for the kinds of stories they were going to be able to tell, and they certainly went back to the Borg well a lot after this, and similar kinds of action adventure stories. There's not a whole lot of that if you think about it. Like you just watched it the first 3 seasons. Like you get Yesterday's Enterprise and like Q-Who. There's some episodes for sure where there's space battle-y stuff happening, but TNG is really not a show that up until now, especially, but even beyond this, there's not a lot of it. But in future shows, there's more of it. Early TNG is not a show really about space battles and action adventure, but most of the time. Number one.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, she's saying Family is the only TNG episode she believes with no ship time. There is time on the ship, but it's the only episode of TNG that there's no time spent on the bridge. Yes. There's not 1 second of bridge time in Family, which kind of sets that one apart. But an equally great episode, if you ask me.
What do you think of the Borg?
I think in this and in Q-Who, they're at their most effective, like kind of scary and faceless. We've talked about it before, the Borg Queen, and kind of the pluses and negatives that brings.
Yep.
I like early TNG Borg in that they are like they're bees. They're not. Locutus is kind of the Borg Queen, I guess, in a lot of ways. That's what they're trying to do, is to have this, face. But no, I think they're scary. I think they pretty well achieve this idea that they are not like the typical adversary that shows up and is like willing to talk to you and is, you know, they have an ideology that is open to discussion, and you know there's conversations that are to be had. Like there's nothing to talk about with the Borg. Like they're coming, they tell you what they're going to do, and they're going to do it, whether you want to respond or not. I like that. I think the set on the Borg cube is really cool.
Yep.
You know, I certainly think from a production standpoint, it's kind of nitpicking, and it's not. I mean, this is not like meant to be negative, but I do think like the way they were able to upgrade the Borg in like First Contact and into Voyager, they certainly look cooler there than they do here. Like they definitely that was money well spent, and definitely a good step in the right direction for, you know, the look of the Borg. But yeah, I think they're effective here. They're scary and alien looking and scary. Yeah. What do you think? Did the Borg work for you here?
I go back and forth. My first instinct was it was just a little frustrating because they seemed a little bit too one-dimensional. But then, like, on the other side of the coin, it's like, yeah, maybe they go too deep in kind of Voyager, and like just after this, they go kind of too deep after this.
Yeah.
So it's tough. I think they are scary, and I think they're definitely alien, and I love like the score on the ship and kind of the set design. But yeah, just to me, I don't know, a little one-dimensional. I'm not knocking it, but it's just a little bit one-dimensional.
And I think that's what prompted them to feel like they needed the Borg Queen for First Contact. I think the struggle that they had from a writing perspective is how do we keep making them interesting as this, you know, adversary that has nothing to say other than, you know, we come to assimilate you, lower your shields and surrender your ships, and that's all there is to it. Yeah. Like there is a dramatic challenge to that. And in Voyager, they do, but really Voyager is the result of a lot of the fallout from First Contact, getting into the Borg Queen and why they're doing what they're doing. And, so, you know, I can't credit or blame, depending on where you fall in this whole thing, Voyager completely. They were running with a lot of the tea leaves that First Contact established. But I think that's why they did it. I think they were experiencing a lot of the same frustrations and struggles that you're kind of voicing. And I think that's where a lot of people draw the line with where they fall on the Borg. I think there are a lot of people who are kind of like, I like the Borg before First Contact, and some people, you know, think the Borg improve after First Contact, and they're more understandable, and there's more dramatic stuff there to chew on. It's an interesting conversation to have, to kind of look at the Borg as a whole, and you know how they developed over time, and which kind of half is more dramatically satisfying. I think I believe I like the Borg Queen because I do think it adds a lot of dimension. I think I would have probably been equally satisfied if I think the Borg would have needed to kind of stop. Like they would have had to stop going back to the well if they were going to keep it the way that they are here in Q-Who and in the Best of Both Worlds. Like you can't keep going back and just having the same battle over and over again with nobody to talk to and no you know, individual challenge to kind of overcome. I think if they were willing to just say, yep, that's the Borg, that's it, we've kind of defeated them, there's nothing more to it, I think I would have been satisfied with that. And I think that the Borg could have stayed this way. But if they wanted to keep bringing them back for understandable reasons, because they're cool and a lot of people like them, they needed to find ways to add some new dramatic tension to them.
Keep it interesting and not...
Because I think it would have gotten repetitive to keep bringing them back, and like, what more is there to do? Then, you know, it's this cube, and there's no one really to talk to, and there's no voice to, you know, go back and forth with. Rob's quoting Michael Piller, who wrote this and was like the showrunner. To me, there was something special about and frightening about the Borg and their lack of character, and lack of character brought for a show that dwells and specializes in character, and to be challenged and possibly destroyed by a character-less villain seemed to me to be a special kind of threat, and it is to me. But I think what Dan's saying is probably why Brandon Braga and Ron Moore came up with the Borg Queen when they wrote First Contact. They were struggling with, what are we going to do with these guys when we have to fill 2 hours of a movie and continue to try to make them interesting.
Yeah.
So to me, it's two sides of a coin. I think it works really well for me, for my money here, given how early they are and how little they've been used up to this point. But I think for them to progress and move forward, I think they needed to do something. And whether or not, we agree or think that the Borg Queen was the way to go, I think there needed to be some sort of dramatic shake up to give them a voice and give them something that, is a little bit more concrete.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anything else stand out to you about the Best of Both Worlds as just a general?
I want to go off on the board, but I'll refrain. I like the end shot. Picard in his little window looking out. It's very, very powerful. Like the reflection on the window of Earth, and
definitely
you can tell there's they talk about it in Platoon, I think. This is kind of going off on a tangent, but you know the empty stare in a soldier. I think I see that in Picard in that shot. So when you can tell, you see the empty stare. There's history there. So
there's a lot going on there, and he's not necessarily okay. Like he might be faking that he's okay, but he's not okay. I think that's really good. I think that's really evocative, and is another thing that drives home how great this episode is. Like the easy thing to do in episodic TV, and the tradition in Star Trek is often that at the end everything's kind of okay, and people are recovered, and it's not okay at all. Like he's not. And that leads into First Contact and family. The next episode, he's certainly battling things in the very next episode, which is great. But even in the First Contact, he's still struggling with it. As there's a trauma involved, which I think is really, really cool, satisfying. So I'm glad you brought that up. I wasn't thinking of that, but definitely a huge moment. Do you wish we saw Shelby again? Shelby is kind of a one-off. This is it. She goes off and does her own thing and never see her again.
I'm fine with not seeing her again. It would be a cool dynamic, but I just think that the cast was just so loaded that I don't think they could afford to bring on another character.
Sure.
Yeah,
I agree. I think she Starfleet's a big place, and I think one of the things that kind of shrinks the universe a little bit is sometimes when they keep bringing back characters who kind of come in, and then it's a big place. There's a lot of things people could be doing. There's ships all over the quadrant, all over the galaxy. I'm kind of content with you don't necessarily run into everybody again, and she's awesome here, and she goes off and does her own thing. I'm sure she has a successful career, and that's cool. So I'm kind of glad that this is her one-off kind of appearance. I think the temptation probably may have always been there to kind of find a way to bring her back and involve her somehow in another episode or some sort of recurring capacity. But I'm pretty content that this was it for her. I don't usually ask you this, but I probably should when we talk about episodes. Who is the MVP of the Best of Both Worlds? Or
Riker,
what is the MVP?
For me, Riker. Yep. I think that his just performance in so many different aspects is really strong. He's you can feel he's struggling with filling Picard's shoes, not going to live up to him, dealing with Shelby's stuff and getting pushed, and turbo lift scenes was pretty cool. And then just when it comes time to kind of step into the command chair, he steps in and crushes it. So
yeah, he does.
Yep.
For me, it's Frakes as Riker.
Okay.
Frakes for sure as Riker. Riker is the like I said. I think people maybe I'm just projecting this onto myself. Like when I was younger, like I said, I would always kind of think of the best of both worlds as like the Borg, Picard, the cutest stuff.
Yeah.
But the older I get, the more I'm like, no, that's a Riker episode.
Yeah.
All the way. It's really all about him. Picard is a kind of a plot device in this. Like he's the thing that makes Riker's drama work.
Yep.
So to me, it's Frakes all the way. I think he's great. I think he's never been better as Riker. He's heroic. He's vulnerable. He's conflicted, and you know he's not always right. I think dealing with Shelby, I think he's stuck up and lets his emotions control his his dislike of her to control his decision making, which I think is real. Like it's not right, but it's cool to see our characters sometimes fall prey to the same things we do. Like in a lot of times, you know, sometimes we are not perfect. And I like we were kind of talking about earlier. Rob was kind of asking where do you fall in Shelby? Is she overly ambitious or is she just driven? Like she's both, and so is Riker. Like it's a complicated thing. It's to me the beauty of it is that neither one of those characters in this episode are easily defined as, you know, one's right, one's wrong. They're both trying to do the right thing, and they both have good ideas, but they're both so kind of well, Shelby's so kind of driven by ambition, and Riker's so conflicted that they're both kind of messed up with how they're doing things.
Yep. Jill makes a great point.
This is really, I had been on the fence about Riker until this point, and I disliked Shelby so much and loved what Riker did. It was really a turning point for her with Riker.
Yeah, you kind of realize like, oh yeah, I kind of care about this guy.
yeah, for sure. And I think he I think he's an underrated character as a whole. Like I said, I think he doesn't quite get the love as far as like his character arc goes, and I think he's got a pretty good one from beginning to end. Like you said, just as somebody who's here doing a rewatch of TNG, you're noticing that from Encounter at Farpoint till now, he's changed a lot, right?
Yep.
He's definitely a different character already in 3 seasons, and I think he's a different character 4 seasons from now at the end with All Good Things, and then in Nemesis, he's changed too. You know, he's making career decisions and stuff. So I think he's really strong, good character, and I think this is probably his peak. I think this is the best Riker that you are going to get in TNG. I think this is his highlight. He's got some great stuff coming, but this is like the most true to his character arc episode. Like this is Riker in a nutshell. This episode is kind of like this is his struggle. This is what he's constantly, this is why his character exists. Like this is the stuff that he's meant to be dealing with. And Rob asked a question. Best TNG episode, favorite TNG episode, as in is this it? How comfortable are you?
I'd say top 5, maybe top 3.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. I'd want to do that kind of like at the end when I watch everything, but yeah, it's definitely top 5 or top 3 probably of episodes. And for me, I consider 2 parts just one episode.
One episode.
So,
yeah. How does it compare to some of the other highlights you've kind of talked about? Like I know a couple weeks ago we were talking about season 3, and you were talking about The Offspring and Sins of the Father and Yesterday's Enterprise. Like
definitely on the upper echelon of those. I think it's it's probably it's up there, top 3 probably.
Yeah.
Confident.
Well, to me, like one of the beauties of Star Trek, like I always kind of talk about Swiss Army knife, you could do anything. Like how different can you get than Yesterday's Enterprise to The Offspring to this? Like how much in common does The Offspring have to the Best of Both Worlds? Like there's not a whole lot. Like they're very different things. So comparing is kind of like apples and oranges. But I guess to answer the question at the beginning of the show, does this episode deserve to be kind of in the Mount Rushmore like of episodes? Like I know that's a lot.
It deserves to be in the Rushmore of all of Trek, I think, not just TNG, but Trek. So,
I think it establishes so much of the world that's going to come, and it lays groundwork for so much that's coming down the road. That it's pretty hard to walk away from it in that respect for me. And I think I've talked about this too. When I'm looking for like a really great Star Trek episode, my favorite Star Trek episodes tend to be ones that can balance like the really cool science fiction stuff and the really good character stuff. Like the ones that aren't just one or the other. If you can find a way to offer some really neat science fiction ideas and world building stuff, and still have really compelling character drama. That's your class. That's a classic. Yesterday's Enterprise is a classic for that. The Offspring is a classic for that. Exactly. This is a classic for that. Yep. So that's why I love it as much as I do.
Yep.
Cool. I think that about covers it for the best of both worlds. I think everyone in the room is pretty uniformly in the positive camp for best of both worlds. Shocker. I know the Groppler said, answering Rob's question, just to kind of read it on air. Rob asked favorite best episode TNG. His answer was he thinks this might be the most TNG episode, but it's not necessarily his favorite. That would go to the Offspring. And that's cool. I mean, that comes down to personal taste. Like I said, the Offspring and this are two very different animals, and it kind of comes down to which, what do you kind of personally respond to more? So nothing wrong with that. But it seems like vast majority of people that either have been in this chat or I've come into contact with on Twitter and over the years agrees that this is a Mount Rushmore episode.
Yeah. I guess, and that kind of leads to my difficulty with ranking episodes, because I'd much rather refer to it as my favorite instead of best. Because to me, a lot of episodes it's Star Trek. It's good. It's the best. So it's it's tough to be able to,
I hear you.
Choose between those two terms, I guess, and a way of thinking about episodes. So
yeah. For sure. It's definitely easier to me to put the favorite hat on than the best. Like, it's easier to, like, what do I respond to personally? Like, that's an easy thing to kind of answer. Best, that gets really, that can get dicey. It's tough. But yeah, I think we covered a lot of stuff. We talked about a lot of the things that I came in wanted to talk about. My favorite kind of scenes, I think we talked about. Reasons that I love it as much as I do. And you've covered a lot of the same stuff. So I guess before we wrap up, any podcasts you want to throw out there? Anything you've listened to in the last week?
Podcast, but I think there was some news about Chris Pine and.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Sure. For sure.
I'll just mention that. Definitely just go read the article. My favorite is Trek Core, so go over to Trek Core. That's what I usually read, all of Star Trek news and stuff. I don't have any podcasts. That's why I brought up the article, because
it's pretty big news.
Yeah, I need to catch up on podcasts. So.
Yeah, shorter work commute will do that too. Yeah. I was kind of mentioning at the very, very, very top of the show. I don't know if it caught me or not when we went live, but the new Ready Room is out. The Chris Jones from Trek FM and Larry Nemeczek talking about all the Star Trek news of the last couple of weeks, which there is a mountainous amount of.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
Sorry, I interrupted. I just finished.
No, it's okay. No. Yeah, no, they cover the Patrick Stewart news, the Chris Pine, contract challenges that are obviously happening. They talk about a little bit of Discovery season 2 stuff. Everything kind of came out of the convention week, and then the tail end of this week with Chris Pine, Star Trek 4 stuff. So definitely recommend that.
Yeah. Rob, I'm ashamed. I have to mention Delta Flyer.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great podcast. Specifically on Voyager, obviously.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I was only on just the first part of it, and then I had internet issues. So, but it was a great time. I love that show. I was a fan before I was even on there. So, yeah.
I listened to it, and it was very cool to hear your voice on something that was not Trek Live. You did a good job. I hope to hear you back on it again at some point.
Hopefully.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, definitely awesome job on that. And that is a good show. That was a good episode too. Like, cool episode to cover. Projections is a good one.
Yep.
So that's one I definitely did listen to. Delta Flyer is a cool show. Rob is talking about The Edge. They did an episode on Tilly. I have not gotten around to that yet. I'm a little backed up on The Edge, to be honest with you. A couple of those last character deep dives I have not listened to, but kind of maybe sort of saving them for a little closer to season 2 as like a ramp up kind of thing. I can listen to them in bulk. But definitely good to know. But there's a ton of really cool Star Trek podcasts out there. There was a really good episode of Earl Grey that I listened to. That a whole bunch of Trek FM people were obviously at Star Trek Las Vegas, and after the Patrick Stewart announcement, they all like rushed to a hotel room and just like sat around and talked about it. And that was kind of cool to hear, like people's raw reactions and hearing them all in the same room, kind of talking about it. And Brandon Shea Mutala, who's like one of my favorite Star Trek podcasters, was like getting emotional on it. It was really cool, like really raw, like good stuff. So I definitely would recommend that. Cool little taste of STLV for those who, like us, didn't quite get out there. Painful. But yeah, there's the pile of Star Trek podcasts is never-endingly massive, and it's all great. And I try my best to hear as much of it as I can, but I try to balance it with some other stuff I'm interested in too. So that's why we try to do this. Try to throw some out there that we've listened to over the last week, and hopefully, share the love. Yeah. Cool.
All right, everyone. That's been episode 59 of Trek Live. Talked about Best of Both Worlds, a bunch of other stuff. Had a great time.
Yeah.
The discussion doesn't have to stop here. Follow Bill and I on Twitter. Twitter is down in the description, or
please vote on my TOS episode polls. That's always helpful. I need your data. I need your votes.
So thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.
Yep. Thanks everybody.